Hello, and welcome to What We've Learned. Welcome to the new year, but welcome to the end of Series 2. As ever, I'm joined by Shane. Hello, Shane, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you too, Steve.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more about the year just gone, but let's just talk to you, dear listeners, about the end of this series and what we wanted to do as a one-off special. We've hit 2021. Can you believe it? We've made it through 2020. Unless we've all woken up and it was that scene, Shane, that you and I and the younger viewers will remember as Bobby Ewing's shower scene in Dallas, not Dynasty, where we all woke up and realised it was just a dream. We probably are dealing with, maybe with a slightly sore head, the consequences of 2020 and onwards, friends. But before we move onwards, we thought it might be a nice idea to go back to talk to some of the brilliant guests we've had over the 2 series that we ran in 2020. And by the way, we'll be back for Series 3 at some point this year. But we wanted to go back and get their thoughts. So we asked them, given it's the turn of the year, a number of questions that we're going to lead you through today, just to get their further thoughts from their great minds on what are they looking at, what have they learned, and as the title of the podcast suggests, what have they learned in 2020 that may lead them into positivity and the future. So that's the area, that's the setup. Shane, that sounds about right, doesn't it? That sounds a good thing to do on early January 2021.
Certainly does, especially with for those who've got a classical education, knowing that Janus was the Roman god who had 2 faces, one looking backwards and one looking forwards. So the lessons learnt from the past and looking forwards to lessons to be applied to the future.
Yes, I like it. So there we are. 1 minute 50 into the podcast already, Shane. 2 elements of ancient history. Mine from Dallas, yours slightly more classical, but both hopefully helpful. So, well, maybe we can start, Shane, perhaps with that first question that we posed, and not only to our guests, we may even give ourselves the indulgence, dear listener, of Shane and I's thoughts for the year ahead as well. But before we get to the year ahead, the first question in order today is the biggest learnings from 2020. So Shane, talk to us about what we were trying to get from this and some thoughts from our friends as well as from yourself.
Well, I think one of the things we got right, Steve, reflecting, was the title of the podcast is What We've Learned, because for me, more than anything, the last year has been a year of learning. And that's a theme that came through from many of our guests. I think for me personally, it was both the breadth of the learning and the pace of the learning. And I think that is really heartening, actually, and it's something I've personally enjoyed the most. But it's also something that Lawrence Mitchell commented on, and he said, really interesting comment, that what he's learned is that when adversity strikes, you've got a choice. You can either spend energy lamenting what has happened and feel sorry for yourself, or you can invest that energy in finding a solution by understanding the current customer context, finding partners with shared values, and creating value to have a positive impact on people. I chose the latter and got to work reminding myself regularly of this great quote from the I Ching. And the quote is that Lawrence shares with us: "Before the beginning of great brilliance, there must be chaos." Fabulous quote, Steve.
Fabulous quote. Yes, it's in a microcosm. It was before there was Zoom, there was Skype. In terms of we need to go through the disorder. It's a really interesting quote. And actually, as you say, in terms of the learnings, we're always learning. Always be learning is definitely the mantra. But I think it's fair for anyone that's reflecting on the year to look back and say, well, actually, there were times of absolute chaos. And I would agree. I think that when you've got that chaos and the order that comes from it, you suddenly do start to not only get back to where you were, but perhaps, as we've seen, Shane, you move on, you go past where you were, you can really progress. As I said, who would have thought that the world, just as we've learned from last month, the number of virtual Zoom-based Christmas parties or virtual quizzes or virtual whatevers you may have, a year ago, the back end of 2019-20 would have never have thought that would have been the way that we now operate. So we've had that fracture and that chaos that's then delivered that positive impact, as Lawrence says. It's really, really correct, really well observed.
Indeed, and I have to say one of my highlights of the Christmas celebration period was the Zoom family wine tasting. I won't go quite much detail into chaos that it descended, but great fun was had by all.
Yes, indeed. And we won't talk about the fact that you shouldn't spill wine on keyboards when doing such wine tastings, is all I'm going to say. Anyway, oh, good. So that's a nice way to kick off with Lawrence. Who else have we got? Which other guests? And Lawrence was Series 2, Episode 2, Shane, if my memory doesn't fail me. Who else have we got from perhaps a bit further back? Series 1, anybody?
So Scott Stockwell, who again I think was one of our most listened to podcasts, because Scott's always got amazing stuff to share with us, and I learn a lot from his breadth of experience and wise words. But his biggest learning that he wanted to share was building on that theme, really, that necessity isn't just the mother invention, it's the accelerator of strategy. In our 2020 world, many of the things that were future plans and thoughts became immediate needs. Virtual working, commercial transactional websites, rapid internal, external organisational collaboration, personal skills development, a lot of things that were twinkles in the eye became immediate and pressing needs to meet. A lovely turn of phrase there. And I think for me that what really resonated there was that some of the things that we've all known needed to be done, there have been many reasons that have been given for not doing them, and that was swept away. And I think that positivity, back to what you said at the start, Steve, for me was the most valuable thing. You saw just big decisions being made quickly, significant changes. And for me, the prediction going forwards is that will continue, particularly in the world that you and I are heavily involved in B2B marketing. E-commerce, to me, is
this is something you've been absolutely been banging on, Shane, rightly, is you see this as a real opportunity, don't you?
Absolutely. I think that for too long we've had, well, it's always been done that way. We've got large sales team, we need to meet people. That's been shown not to be true. And it's also, we all know the world's changed, and Amazon one-click's been around, and you'll probably tell us exactly how long, Steve. I don't know, I can't remember. But that's what we all want. So why can't we have that to buy, £1 million oil rig, as well as a book?
Yeah, I can't give you the exact answer to one click without Googling it, Shane, which feels very remiss given the way that you can just relay off months of the year and their origin. However, what it links to is something I've banged on about for a long time, which is the Amazon effect. It is what I would call it, and I'm sure it's not just me, is I think there's been for a very long time in lots of industries the pressure of benchmark on how well, how easy, how convenient Amazon is to use, and familiarity as well. And I think organizations in many markets have been lazy. So I think, well, we don't need to change. Absolutely Scott's point. And I was on a call with a head of sales and marketing operations at a big pharmaceutical company a couple of weeks back. And he said that he thinks COVID has accelerated their digital transformation by a decade. 6 months, 7 months has given them a decade of progress. And those perhaps more Luddite amongst that weren't willing to change, not just in marketing, sales as well, and other parts of the business, have been forced to. And if you take your point with e-commerce, there's a necessity to do it, but there's also an opportunity. And the Amazon effect for me is just learn, benchmark from brands like that are much larger. And the people that want to buy that £1 million thing or that €5 thing, whatever it may be, if it feels a bit like Amazon, there's a familiarity to it, it makes it easy. So yeah, absolutely agree with you, Shane. I think that's been an opportunity that's been missed for a long time. And maybe this is the year, and indeed the rest of the decade, that we start to see B2B take e-commerce a lot more seriously.
And I agree. And I think that the other thing is that the platforms are there. And one of the things that struck me was how quickly PPE was available on eBay from very traditional B2B suppliers who suddenly realized they had a new market. And that was that creative thinking I've seen in so many businesses, taking a problem and going, oh, well, actually although it's really difficult, there's a new market here for us, or there's a new way of solving that problem. And I think thinking about e-commerce it's not even having to, right, we've got to build the website to take the payment. There are other options out there. that can be explored.
Yeah, and funny enough, actually, I think that links to my biggest learning from 2020, in case you're asking, is around, just the positivity of 2020. It has been and will be for a very long time a year that, the history books look back as a very difficult time, for sure. But to that point, and to Lawrence's quote from I Ching around the idea that there is chaos, but there can be brilliance and there can be opportunity. And e-commerce is a good example, Shane, that suddenly, a niche local B2B or indeed B2C, it doesn't really matter, player can suddenly have the whole world. I mean, we know this from, you see your Amazon marketplaces and your eBay power sellers that have suddenly opened up the world to them. But I think for business to business, it's a real opportunity. And I also, by the way, with e-commerce, Shane, I don't think it has to be about just transacting in the way that we do as consumers with the web. I learned this many years ago working client side in B2B with e-commerce, is that you can use the power of the web to get a lot of the legwork done and indeed to help salespeople. So we found real success with using e-commerce as a quotation system. So the order still may be placed back then face to face, and maybe it will be again in 2021, or it could be over the phone, but you could use the website just to be clever at the bit that is quite onerous. So don't see that people need to flip a credit card for e-commerce to be successful. Passing a PO number through via email on the back of using e-commerce as part of the journey is still a very, very sensible exercise and a very rewarding one.
I completely agree. And I think there's so much that can be done with some of the new tools, the web personalization tools, about making it easy to find things when you land on someone's website. If it's a B2B website and you've got 1,600 products, not always easy to navigate your way through. But now with the sort of ABM tools that we have that can customize those products to different verticals, it's just becoming better. And
better and more relevant.
Absolutely, that relevance. And that's something that, in fact, Sam Hill, Director of Customer Experience at Infinity, picked up
Sam Hill,
on.
Series 2, Episode 9, Shane.
Oh, just love the way you reel off the data.
He says, looking at the screen of all the episodes.
And he said, I think this is a reminder for all of us, it's not just the technology, but it's the way we're thinking, to your point, about how we apply it, and making sure we apply it, whether this is internally, and to quote him directly, this can be applied broadly from internal, i.e. to a colleague, to external, i.e. customer interactions. What we've got to remember is, in his words, you are accountable for delivering value, not the recipient. Never assume value is being realised. And if it isn't, take the responsibility for ensuring it is. I think that goes directly to your point about, just make it easier.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, and we'll talk about books, I'm sure, as we always do on these episodes. But that Steve Krug's book from 2004, I still end up referring to now, which is around usability, called Don't Make Me Think. And on the inside cover, in fact, I'm staring at it, Shane, on my bookcase as we talk. On the inside cover, I know there is a picture of his wife in a field, and there's a very simple kind of speech bubble above it that says, if something's easy to do, I do it more often. That absolutely encapsulates what the opportunity is with digital. Forget e-commerce, not just digital, is communication, is make it easy and they will come, I guess, is that, to paraphrase Kevin Costner's Field of Dreams, incorrect.
But it's true. I mean, I reflect on what I do and what I prioritize. It's the things that are easier and also the things that I enjoy doing. And there's often a strong parallel between the two. The more difficult, the hard, they're at the bottom of the list.
But that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because 2020 has forced us to have to think about tackling things that are quite hard. To your point of change, and from that conversation with that big pharmaceutical brand, is that as an organization, they're probably a bit lazy. They didn't really want to embrace or force change, because often people don't like it. But we've had to wrestle with some demons this year gone to make sure that we survive and indeed thrive in some cases.
I think that's a point that Ian Hughes picked up on as well. It's been
Series 2, Episode 1. Yes. I'll stop doing this soon, Shane. Don't worry.
No, because people can play bingo. Can they get there before you?
I hope they don't play bingo on what we say. My goodness.
And we've talked about, corporate developments, strategic change, out of being forced to, but I think it's also a theme that's come through from everybody. And Ian Hughes really made this point very well. And you can remind me of the quote in a minute. which is that it's about our own personal development, us as human beings, which, we are the force of change. It is in our power. So remind me, because I think you might
Yeah, this is
have
the
a quote there.
Stockdale paradox that Ian spoke about. I think you mean, is that right?
That's right.
As everybody knows, the guy that was born in 1923 in Abingdon, Illinois, in the US, died 2005 July, but fought in the Vietnam War. So a very, very decorated vice admiral and aviator. But his quote around the Stockdale paradox and what Ian was referring to, Shane, was, "You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be." Now, I think that was, as a prisoner of war, that was where that originally came from, which, of course, thankfully is not quite as harsh an environment that we've just been through. But it's a really interesting, it links back actually to what Lawrence's quote said and what they've all said. There's a common thread, isn't there, Shane, coming through?
Very much so. It's this is our ability, to get through a very tough time. And so one of the next questions we actually asked all of our guests,
this is where we bring it down a bit, isn't it, Shane?
It is. We get a bit more real now. Is sort of as well as what people have learned is we've all had some highs and lows last year. Hopefully, this year there's going to be more better moments. But we have to be honest. We don't know what's coming. I think that's biggest learning for all of us.
As we've talked about before, 2020 wasn't just a unique year, it was the start of a decade. So let's hope that history and patterns don't quite repeat on that same basis. Yeah, so we're talking worst moments personally and professionally, Shane. Who have we got? Who are we going to share with first?
Who have we got? We've got, again, Lawrence Mitchell sharing with us a really personal insight. And I think this was true for many of us.
Sorry.
Yeah. His personal feeling very much of the fear of lockdown, the thought of lockdown was worse than the actual lockdown experience. That unknown, the fear of the unknown. And he says, I didn't like the idea of not being able to leave the country, let alone leave the house. Freedom is one of my highest values.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, can't we, for sure? And it's funny, actually, I would say for me, on a professional level, I mean, 2020 was a really difficult, stressful year, but I have to say I came off quite lightly in terms of we were busy with work, not just the podcast, but, things that actually pay bills, Shane, as well, and learned lots. But I only realized this only a couple of weeks ago, just a week leading up to Christmas. I had to go out to a meeting, and bear in mind, I haven't 2020, I didn't get on a train from about mid-March onwards. I haven't been into London the whole of that year since that date. And that was a real change for me. To Lawrence's point of freedom, is the freedom you realise you've got and the freedom you realised afterwards you've lost. And what I really felt quite down about, actually, I was driving from home, Bedfordshire, down to a meeting. And I just missed being out. Not so much driving, I don't mind driving, but the idea that, wow, this is a massive part of my life that's gone in the last 7 months. And of course, as you have, and as many of people listening in, is international travel with work's always been a big part of my life. Forget that. This was just the act of getting on a train or traveling an hour around the motorways to go and meet other people has been a real loss for me. It's been, in retrospect, quite a sad thing. Goodness, I feel quite isolated, more than I'd perhaps realised at the time.
I think that challenge, as you say, of that geographic restraint, and I know you love travel, and I know you've been to amazing places in the world, hit all of us. For me, particularly personally.
Sorry, Shane, by the way, I wasn't going to High Wycombe on that particular trip, which is not on our list of amazing, but functionally brilliant. Obviously perfect.
But the strategic plan for this year, and this is where it shows you the value of having a strategic plan, was that I was supposed to be traveling around the world this year doing masterclasses starting in China in February, which I think I alluded to in series 1, and clearly needed to have something else to take my mind off that, and the podcast came along. Just picking up on your fact that you mentioned that you need to do something else apart from the podcast to pay the bills. I'm really disappointed, because I thought, now with the Prince Harry and Meghan Spotify deal, Steve, you were going to be announcing that we had too similarly signed something that was going to be as rewarding.
Well, I thought you were going to say that this is when we tell people we've actually left the royal family of B2B marketing, and we go off on our own, Shane. No, we'll leave it to them. I just don't, the adoration is enough, Shane, from the hundreds and hundreds of people that listen to us every episode, rather than having to go into hiding. Although the idea of living out of Canada is absolutely fine with me if we can get on planes. So no, we've got a way to go. Maybe Series 3 we'll make that announcement to the world. We shall see. So we've got Lawrence. We've got some thoughts from me. Who else have we got, Shane? That we've managed to gather some thoughts on that worst moment.
Well, technology played large in all our lives. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, the Zoom world that we've inhabited. But of course, when you're in your Zoom world, you are very reliant on power and on broadband. And for many of our guests, this was a theme that came out. I mean, oh my goodness, poor Scott, his worst nightmare happened. Total power failure 4 minutes before the delivery of the keynote to the IDM graduation, and how he pulled it off, I don't know, because you were there too.
I can still see the white of Scott's eyes, because I was comparing that, and Scott was our brilliant keynote, brilliant before and brilliant afterwards, because it literally was a couple of minutes. And Scott, being Scott, had been incredibly diligent in preparing. We'd done dress rehearsals beforehand, the week before, leading up to it, and then power failure week minutes in, but he found a way. He pivoted, Shane. As remember, we used to all talk about pivoting in 2020, and managed to use a mobile. And the best bit of that is you genuinely would have not known if you weren't me, Scott, and a few other people, and perhaps who Scott lives with, who may well have got the other end of it, and the electricity and power people near him. You wouldn't have known. He just was excellent. The keynote in isolation was fabulous, and he dealt with it quite superbly.
Such a professional. I mean, chatting actually, he and I were chatting last night, and it was even more amazing when it turns out that he was holding up his phone in order to get a signal to hotspot with the laptop battery sort of on not quite its last legs, in the corner of the room, which was the only place that could get the signal. Amazing, because he just comes across so brilliantly. And I think that's it. It's just people have been in adversity sort of showing their true side, and some people have just aced it, and Scott's one of them.
Absolutely, yeah. Although I might, I may raise Scott and offer you Sam. So Sam Hill, of course, Shane, as you remember, I mean, it told us what is his worst move? Moving home to rural Sussex and starting a new life with family. Not that bit, but the fact that the move to that part of the world necessitated 21 hours. Just take that in for a sec. 21 hours of calling to a very well-known ISP to make sure that he could get his broadband services activated. Now that, if that isn't the lowest of the lowest levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs right there, Shane, I don't know what it is. The pain of not having internet. I felt this actually. We had 10 days of no broadband in 2020, which was terribly disabling, and probably would directly affect YouTube's revenues, for my daughter not being able to consume YouTube for 10 days. But I know poor Sam had such pain when we spoke to him, and it was coming out of that from a point of view of tech fail that wasn't his fault. Again, a bit like Scott.
Absolutely. And, however well prepared you are on your backup plans, they don't account for that. I have to say, I should do a great shout out to our neighbours who have very kindly, we all now know how to log into each other's broadband, because if one provider goes down, literally in my case 3 minutes before moderating a conference, I was able to get on, not through hacking, but completely by consent, to the neighbours' broadband, which was
how the world has changed, Shane. It used to be not so many years ago that people would name their Wi-Fi access as passive aggressively for people that might try and borrow their internet. Of course, now we've moved to a whole completely loving, almost late 60s environment of free love and free broadband for all, at least if you live in a neighbourhood where it's on offer. Yes, nice. Okay. Who else have we got from a point of view of worsts?
Well, worst, I think, and I think this sort of picks up the theme of what I found stressful, is that it's uncertainty. I've realised I like to plan, and Ian Hughes sort of said, it's that unrelenting uncertainty, particularly when you're running a business. And I think that's the companies I work with as a non-exec, the fast growth small businesses where cash flow is king, just trying to predict pipeline last year. impossible, absolutely impossible. And really hard decisions have to be made. So I think for all of us, that uncertainty of being able to know you were making the right decision. I mean, what about you, Steve? Because, obviously with Junction Agency, when did that sort of uncertainty hit you?
So it's interesting, actually. We were talking about it just a couple of weeks ago, pre-Christmas, as a bit of a, we made it, okay. And I remember sitting there in March with the rest of the team saying, guys, I just don't know what this is going to mean. We've always prided ourselves at Junction on not working to retainers. And as you'll know, Shane, I've spoken to you about this before. I worked client side, and I was never convinced by retainers building or breeding the right kind of relationship. So from an agency point of view, you want them because it gives you the certainty of billings. But we've always said, no, that's just not the way we work. The downside is it's always been a bit more project based. You don't quite know. So we went from, we probably know 6 months out how we're looking at best, to, my goodness, back in March, I've no idea. And just listening to you then, Shane, actually it's just come straight back into my head, that conversation. And linked to that with the cash flow was we work with quite a few technology companies who, for reasons we don't need to debate, will always pay suppliers like us on 60 days, regardless of what terms we may want. And I think that was, that move was, are we going to get crunched here from a cash flow point of view? And by nothing we've done, as many, unfortunately, organizations found in 2020, they just disappear because cash flow is king in those smaller businesses. But it actually led into a positive, is that quite a number of those tech companies changed their policies to support. They recognise that actually they've got a responsibility, and it's vital. They don't want to kill their ecosystem by their agencies and support disappearing. That those 60 days unofficially became more like 15 days. So that was a big blessing for us, and for, I'm sure, an awful lot of other organisations. The uncertainty, I'm sure, it changes something, as we've already said, people are fearful of, Shane, but I think it's, again, turn a negative into a positive is, okay, we don't quite know what it's going to look like, but my goodness, we can go for it. There is, harking back to Lawrence's quote again, brilliance to be found if we keep calm and carry on, to use a much used 1940s quote.
I think that's really heartening that you mentioned about that corporate responsibility, if you like, to the wider ecosystem. And I think, I really hope that continues. Whether it will or not, we'll see. But I think that organisations are starting to think differently, and we've touched on it.
Not all of them, though, Shane. I don't. I would say it's quite binary. There were some that did, and there really were some that didn't. And I think, actually, will it change? Honestly, I'm not sure. I think we've had a stretch of the elastic band that will come back. However, for organizations in that ecosystem, in that supply chain, there will be an element, as we've talked about on podcasts previously last year, of picking your clients, of saying, well, hold on a minute, your values and your principles don't add up with ours. We don't want to be treated like that, and therefore we're not going to work with you. And I think the power might shift because of that. And organizations that were bigger, and as we know for many, many years, if, well, I'm bigger than you, I can make the rules, may well find, as I said, some of them have gone on the journey, but some may be forced to think more responsibly and more wider in terms of that ecosystem that they don't just support, but they need as well. That's the really important bit that's come across from that change of last year.
I think you've picked up something there that I think is perhaps the biggest shift, more than maybe even technology. There's a societal shift which choice becomes perhaps the biggest thing we value. And what I mean by that is just that point you've picked up. We choose who to do business with if we're lucky enough to be in that position. But if you're an employee, you choose who to work for. And I think this is really starting to come through, the way that organisations have treated their staff, or not, as you said, because not everybody has done brilliantly. There have been some appalling stories out there. But actually, I think the difference is that people will prioritise their work-life balance very differently going forwards, or the companies they choose to buy from is becoming more and more important because of the way that they perhaps give back. Going to be very interesting as we move forward, seeing what happens around some of the corporate tax regimes. But I actually think this is the biggest change we will potentially see in the next decade is that society will make, and individuals in that society will make choices that are important to them.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good point. In fact, even I'll give you an example of slightly lateral one of that. As you know, I sit on the board of Table Tennis England, so a sports governing body for table tennis, and we had this very discussion. Should have been later this month, late January, should be the national championships, which are televised, but rely mostly on people bums on seats going to it because of the size and the type of the sport. Unfortunately, the championships still can't happen this year, but there is not. We've evolved conversations in that organization from, well, how do we adapt for the environment? How do we make things virtual? And then how do we move back to now kind of transcending that of, hold on a minute, the national championships, which are normally held in Nottingham, is geographically limiting for a lot of the country, like any location would be. And now there's actually this pressing need to say, well, we will need and want to create an environment where physical and virtual spectators can engage with the sport. So rather than it being a plan B, it becomes plan 1A, if you will, which is you've got a great opportunity to bring together and make it a bigger spectacle. And that's not just about that championship in that sport. I think that thread can run through a lot of things. Is people say, well, hold on, I live in Cornwall. I'd never been able to go to this, but now, and it maybe takes us back to the Amazon effect, Shane, is that the Zoom effect, if you will, is that, well, last year I could go and get an experience from you. So why would you turn it off in 2021 and beyond? I think the rubber has stretched, or the muscle has stretched into a new shape. That means, yeah, whatever aspect you look at, people now expect things in a different way.
It's very exciting. I mean, I think absolutely. Personally, I agree with you. And I think that's so brilliant you're thinking in that way, because as you know, I do lots in the event world, and I am passionate about hybrid events being the future, because it's about, as you say, it's about inclusivity. You can have people attend who would have never been able to get there or physically attend, maybe because of cost or because of physical distance or for other reasons. So really exciting that this is a way forwards, that we can all enjoy things that perhaps just weren't accessible to us. So
well, I think even philosophically, Shane, the idea in a world where, as has been well documented over the last few years, the world has become much more fractured, much more political. There's been much more division. What's really heartening to what you've just said is that the world becomes smaller again. That I remember last year working on one of B2B Marketing's events and hosting a stream. There was a bit of downtime and just using the virtual platform in the chat box of basically saying, well, where's everyone from? Now, that event normally would attract, I don't know, 80, 90% UK people and a few overseas. But the chat box was filled instantly with people. I remember distinctly the first three people. One was from Nepal, one was from Brazil, and one was from Switzerland. This world of B2B marketing in that case has suddenly become bigger, yet smaller, that we can connect. We've got an opportunity through work to learn from people that if it was a traditional means of traveling to an event, it just never would happen either way around. I think it is really heartening as well as really exciting.
So some of those who know me, who are listening to this, know that I'm a geographer by background, and I'm fascinated by all of this. And it was actually something that was predicted back in 1997 by a person called Francis Cairncross with The Death of Distance. Really interesting book, 1997, about our shrinking world. And I think that it's now truly delivered on that. And reading, she used to write for The Economist, and one of the things that is really interesting is just the change of where people are choosing to live. We're seeing it in the US. People are choosing to leave the Golden State, leave California because of all sorts of reasons, real estate prices, forest fires, and because they don't have to be there anymore. They don't have to be based in Silicon Valley. And I think this, again, back to personal choices, is something one of our other guests touched on. So Sam Hill, he talked about earlier the problems with technology having moved, but one of his highlights of the year was moving home to rural Sussex to start a new life with his family in this really, he's posted a fantastic picture, which we'll share on our LinkedIn, of a very happy lovely environment to be based in.
Yes, indeed. I'm also jealous of him because he had the great foresight to marry somebody with the same name as him. So Sam and Samantha, you can't get it wrong. If you get checks from great Auntie Deirdre and you're going to argue over whose they are, you can't be wrong. So yes, Sam and Lottie living the rural dream, and with broadband that hopefully, or as we learned when we spoke to him, is just about reliable enough, Shane. So he's got that balance. I think that's been one of the positives for me actually as well, is having a chance to spend more time, not at home, although I've done that, and I've always, certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, had a balance of home, office and about. The ratio's changed, but I've never had the ability to be at home with my wife and daughter in the same way, so that the rhythm of the day, for example, and it feels like eons ago, Shane, but believe it or not, we used to punctuate, Molly and I, our working days, hers downstairs in the dining room, me up here in this office, with trampoline. We've got a trampoline in the garden. She could never get me on it because, well, I'm not built for trampolines. But it was a sunny, if you remember 2020, April, May was particularly sunny and warm. We would take morning breaks. We would take lunchtime trampoline breaks that neither of us would typically get Monday to Friday. But we both got a lot out of, probably more me than her, to be honest. Even it was fabulous, and if anyone ever wants to see my seat drop, I'm very welcome to
well, I do hope you're going to
drop round, literally. Well, I don't know about that.
I really, I feel that there's a video moment that ought to accompany this podcast.
I think if you're familiar with the acronym NFSW, not safe for work, I think that's probably where we are with me doing too many seat drops. But it's back to Sam's point of that nice change, the ability to get that life balance for certain has been a real positive of 2020 for me. How about you?
That's very true, actually. It's interesting you mentioned about the table tennis, because we're lucky enough to have a table tennis table at home, but finally I have learned to serve properly, because I actually had the time to review the video, and I now know that I am supposed to have the ball on a flat palm, and that it has correct. To so a new skill, who knew? And that was just born out of the frustration of not being able to play proper tennis. But it's something that other guests like Lawrence touch on as well, the reconnecting with other things. And he says, I've enjoyed leading a much simpler life, giving time to learn and do things like setting up a hydroponic system for growing plants. That sounds fantastic.
Wow, it does.
And I'm now very jealous because Lawrence is based in Australia, exploring the local beaches, which is really just like that I have missed. I must admit, I love the coast. But I have discovered new
there's not many beaches for us, Shane, in Bedfordshire, are there? That's to be fair. You can go off somebody with his beaches everywhere, poor Lawrence.
Indeed, but for me it was wild swimming. So that
yes,
was mine.
Yes, indeed.
As you say, there's lovely hot months. I've discovered. Well, I've always loved doing it, but I've discovered some new river spots around here, and you start to talk to people and realise there's quite a few of you that enjoy doing that as well.
Yeah, indeed. You meet new people. Absolutely. It's funny enough, actually, somebody we both know that runs an agency that was considering a merger, an acquisition, by complete chance, walking his dogs, ran into somebody walking other dogs, had a chat and realised they had a mutual friend, but was the person that was interested in that purchase, that I'm sure had a big effect on building that business relationship by just being out in the countryside and meeting by chance other people that could endorse the third party, that person who was interested in the acquisition. Really interesting how these things happen.
Yeah, chance. That's very true. And I think that's, for me, one of the hardest things has been perhaps not being able to interact and have as many face-to-face meetings, and how much I realise that both the business community is really important from a work point of view, but we're so lucky. There's just such a great bunch of people that I miss the chance to socialise with.
Yes, indeed. Well, look, that brings us back to a positive guess, maybe Scott Stockwell, because there's two sides to we heard about Scott's negative, Shane, around his tech fail. But what was Scott's highlight, a positive for him? The same evening, I think.
It was the same evening. Yes, absolutely. He said the absolute best was being asked to deliver the keynote for the IDM graduation, and using an ASMR toast. Now, I'm going to get you to explain what that is.
Well, autonomous sensory meridian response.
You see, I knew I wouldn't get that out.
That's, by the way, dear listener, that's our 15th take of that particular part. Yeah, so ASMR, and having been there, Shane, is that, and what's, so it's a really, and you'll know this from your days with the IDM as well. Graduation is always a brilliant positive thing, but it's never been virtual before. The event, and I hope I'm not biased, but having been there and involved in it, it was an incredibly positive um, alternative rather than a supplement for it or a replacement. It didn't let down. It was brilliant. But part of that was Scott and his keynote and ASMR. He used a great example of it. And if you're not familiar with it, go and Google it in terms of what it means, because what he was demonstrating is how you can record and how ASMR affects your sensory feelings, so emotions, and using that as a medium for marketing. So he wasn't advocating it, but he was saying, well, look, this is another opportunity. This is a different way. And as we sit here recording and you sit here listening to this podcast, what about audio? What are the opportunities to get some kind of sensory response, some emotional reaction to people using a medium like this? So he was trying to, cut a new edge to things, as well as delivering a really heartfelt and inspiring keynote as well. So I can absolutely second why that would be an incredibly positive moment from 2020 for sure.
So do you think then, in terms of engaging the senses, looking forward to our new technical developments, that smelly vision will come soon?
I hope so. And as a child that grew up with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, I still dream for the day that I can scratch or I can lick a wallpaper and get a snosberry. So yeah, maybe it will, Shane. I think.
Oh, but that's here and now. Have you not had your direct mail pack with the you can scratch and taste the chocolate here?
Oh, indeed. My daughter had some very stickers. The questionable smell of some of them. They all seem to merge into one in the end. But yes, the idea that I think it leads us on almost to developments. The future is this hybrid of the physical and digital world. For me, certainly feels like it's going to be a prediction of what's coming in the next year and indeed decade.
Which brings us on to the last question that we asked our guests, which was very much the prediction for the remainder of the decade, or we also asked about New Year's resolutions, but we'll perhaps come back to that. So your prediction, Steve, is you're saying more change to come. What else?
Oh, yeah, so I think there'll be a hybrid, Shane. I think we're finding that, as I've talked about already, I think we had, and it feels a little bit like, I once did a skydive, and you jump out of a plane with a parachute on in fact, not even a parachute on your back, with a parachute on the instructor's back. You don't have the luxury of a parachute if you're just tandem, but you hit terminal velocity, so incredibly fast, and then the jolt as the parachute opens, and then the relative tranquility. And it's incredibly tranquil. If you've never done a skydive, anybody listening in, it's the moment the chute opens that it feels very relaxed. And again, back to Lawrence's point, but I think what we've gone is it's incredibly fast, a jolt of change, and now for me, I think we'll find that we spring back to the middle somewhere, to a comfortable middle. And I think that might mean for technology and human that we'll find even more symbiosis between how we engage with technology, for events, for communication, all sorts of aspects of life. Even if I will, the sales process. Salespeople went from hurtling around the country or the world on planes, on trains, or in Vauxhall Vectras or whatever they're in, going around, and then suddenly were locked up, and they've had to embrace that. I think we'll find a hybrid, an equilibrium of the two in lots of different parts of life over the coming weeks and months and years, rather than it just being the same pace of headlong direction towards digital.
I don't agree.
Okay, interesting. Good. So no more Vauxhall Vectras, is that what you're saying? I get that.
Yeah.
another reference for the younger listener there, Shane. Yes, yeah. Go on then. Where are we going? Are we all becoming androids?
I don't think we are necessarily going to find that equilibrium. Actually, I think we're going to be out of kilter for the next decade. Actually, I think because it's going to be a decade of change, and actually often we as humans find change hard to cope with.
Very much so.
And that's why I think we might not get that nice balance quite that quickly. So in fact, it's something Ian Hughes picked up. He predicting, it's going to be the decade of change, exponential change, and a reevaluation of priorities. Lawrence also said, we've got to remember it takes 24 days to form a new habit, 66 days for that habit to become established, and 254 days for that habit to be fully formed. So, that's something that's sort of building on that, with that in mind. He says, whatever happens in 2021, we're not going backwards. But he does agree with you. He agrees that the future of work will be a hybrid experience with the individual deciding where and when to work.
I mean, forget the beach comment from earlier. I'm big fan of Lawrence again now. Yeah,
So,
it's interesting, isn't it? Because the 254 days, if you look back to 2020, we had enough days for that, as you say, to become muscle memory fully formed. It will be really interesting to see, even now, as we go into the new year, what the change will be in 254 days, rough maths, what's that down in kind of autumn of this year? Will there be new reactions to 2020 that become the new norm? And will actually that phrase, Shane, just be one we kick around all of the time? Because to your point and to Ian's point, we may not be constantly going at the pace we are, but so we're not hitting terminal velocity all of the time, but we are continuing to go somewhere at quite a pace, even if it doesn't feel like it, which to my analogy with free falling is once the parachute goes, you're still dropping at quite a pace. It just doesn't feel like the pace you were previously dropping or moving at.
yeah, I think that analogy to the parachute is a good one. I think a lot of people, who knows what we've got this year, and what's coming again, I think that uncertainty is the unbalancing bit. It's the again, it is the fear of the unknown. There's a lot of hope, obviously, but I think this comes back to the point that we touched on earlier, and again, something Lawrence picked up, that this need for leaders, whether it's leader of a company, leader of a country, need to become and will increasingly become more compassionate and become masters at balancing the needs of business with the needs of individuals. I think that's really hopeful, that quote. I hope it's the case. But the bit I'm really concerned about, he goes on to say, is about ensuring that well-being remains a strategic priority. I really hope it does.
Yeah, well, I wonder whether that's back to your point again, is that so 254 days to form a habit is, and your point of people, whether they're employee, suppliers, partners, recognizing that actually I want to work for, do things with people or organizations that share my values, and that power shift may happen, that it's not just work for the biggest because they're the best, as you get a different dynamic, and maybe even Shane, that plays out in, if we look at the biggest by market capitalization of organizations in 5-10 years time, will they be the same ones as today? I think it could be really interesting to see where that direction of travel goes.
Yeah, and I'm picking up on that point. I think, we mustn't forget it's not just about the technology, but the great podcast that Herman did about the value of data. Actually, the next decade.
There is episode 10, Herman, Shane. Yes, absolutely.
Indeed. About the companies that are going to be valued the most, I absolutely think that Herman is a visionary, and it's going to be the ones that really understand the value of all their data, and that use strategically of data is going to be so important, because we've got big challenges coming up, whether it's with AI and the sort of data that's collected there and the decision-making process. So I love data. It looks like the next decade might be keeping me very busy, but we've got some really interesting things in the way that we can be more sophisticated, but lots of things we're going to have to learn as well.
Oh, I think there's an interesting one around technology always, of the appropriateness and that balance. I was reading something actually in Wired magazine only a couple of weeks ago about AI and religion, which I'd not even considered, is the opportunity, but perhaps the danger, the fundamental danger to religious scholars around AI's ability to consume, to process, to study transcripts, and to put an output which could support and really help religious beliefs, but it could also erode them further as well. There's a whole spectrum of issues with such technologies, what it will mean for us as a race, and on our beliefs and our values on all sorts of areas.
Yeah, there's lots to think about, certainly. And I think, Scott touches on more technology coming, and I think, his top ones, as well as AR, is going to be an AI. XR, extended reality, and that's sort of touching on that point you made there, is that whether you get that blending of trying to work out of new ways of looking at things can work in a positive way or also in a negative way. And once you get into extended reality, not quite sure whether this is extended reality, but one of my favorite moments of some of the stuff you posted was your deep fake video from last year.
Yes,
Steve.
Indeed. Yes, me dressed as my face wed to the front of the lead singer of the Rolling Stones, to the action hero within Die Hard and other places. Yeah, I mean that is fascinating, Shane. And terrifying equal measure. That honestly was a free app that took me probably less than about 2 or 3 minutes to master and to drop my face fairly convincingly, I would say. Not necessarily as a great singer or a great actor, but from a point of view of in there, and you think, my goodness, what will the pace of change be for that kind of technology, and what are the positives? So I thought, as you may remember, the ability for hyper personalization using that technology is incredible for marketers. Goodbye stock photography and dull stuff like that. Hello, opportunity to put context. But equally with that comes the risk of the abuse, and my goodness, what may happen from corporate and personal lawsuits and disruption when people misuse this technology, which we always live on that edge of the sword, don't we?
We do indeed. But I think in terms of near time tip, if you like, is for this year, to me, it is going to be the year of the personal sales video, whether it's using Vidyard or Loom. We're going to see this on LinkedIn a lot more. And I agree with you, used well can be a really personal, useful tool. But used badly or inappropriately, oh my goodness, it's going to be horrific.
Yeah, indeed, very interesting. And interesting, isn't it? Even do you think the ecosystem that may breed in terms of makeup and script writing and lighting and all those things that normally the domain of the Hollywood movie or the TV production studios, that actually you'll start to think about that more. We've gone beyond what does your Zoom and your Teams background look like to how well made up are you? How's your lighting for that personalized video? None of those are barriers. They're all opportunities, but they're logical progressions of that use and that cultural change.
I've already been told by many experts, but including my wonderful daughter, that the time to leave my headset and what do we call the air traffic controller Lego look has gone. It was all right for the first 6 months of 2020, but come on, mum, when are you going to upgrade to the professional studio look that you should be having? And she's absolutely right. And you've just mentioned that. I think actually we're all going to need to be producers.
Yeah, even on a small level, Shane, part of what I did over Christmas was decorated my home office, because it's always been the room that the least people in the world ever come into, or indeed that come into my house, to the most popular room in my house. So I thought, well, it needs a bit of a spit and a polish, some new artwork going up on the walls, all that sort of stuff, because that's actually that's my world. That's the window into Steve that never was there before. So it all makes perfect sense.
So along with that, what about some New Year's resolutions? You sound as though you've got on with one of them, which is
recognition of give the background a polish. I need to probably work on the foreground, or me, but and to that point, actually, Shane, I think it's something that I knew prior to 2020 and was pretty good at, but lost sight of, is that was, we've talked about already, that balance is finding the new rhythm or pace of the day. So not being afraid that actually my commute's gone, so if I start work early, it's okay to finish earlier. Or historically, so many people are used to lunchtime being the time where you may take the longest break of the day, but why should you? And for me, that means in the coming weeks, as I started to do actually as a foray into return to golf in the summer, is for running, which is something I'm passionate about, is to get back into that and to say, well, okay, I'll just manage my day, that if I go for a run at 10 o'clock in the morning, without guilt, it's fine. I can still work. It's the new balance of what the working day will look like, I think is one of my resolutions for sure. How about yourself?
I think for me, that's part of it, absolutely, and really important to take those breaks. But that importance, and you touched on it earlier, of being outside, for me, being in your natural environment, the garden's been so important this year. Just a wonderful haven, and it's lots of people the same, but just being outside, really appreciating a wonderful countryside that we've got near us, enjoying that. But the other theme for me, and I mentioned it earlier, is all about people. And that's something, it's not a New Year's resolution necessarily, but it's something that both Sam, Scott, Lawrence, Ian all say is really important, is treasuring people. And I think it's really interesting. Lawrence says, making sure my New Year's resolution is to focus energies on helping as many people as I can. And I think that helping people And it's something I found throughout my career actually really rewarding. And some of the most rewarding things I've done is some of the voluntary stuff, where you just get so much back. And I think lots of people have found that more recently as well. Also, something that Sam says, New Year's resolution: cherish all real world moments with family, friends, and colleagues once the pandemic retreats.
Mm-hmm.
And Ian as well, the team, and empowering the team and allowing those around you to flourish. So that's really nice that people are foremost in everybody's thoughts.
Yeah, particularly Sam's one about that real world moments as well. It harks back to, actually, it's just come into my head of a memory from Cambodia in 2006, Shane, believe it or not, Angkor Wat, an iconic place to go. UNESCO World Heritage, list of places you must see before you die type territory. And all of us falling into the trap, many of us at sunrise with our cameras of all sorts of different flavors set up. And a French guy who was with us, across dozens of people, just absolutely berating the look with your eyes, not with your lens. The idea that at the time we just looked at, well, what are you saying? We must take a picture of this, is absolutely to what Sam's saying, is just don't live through the technology, through the lens all the time. Be there, be present in the real world. And I think it's 14 years, 15 years to remember and to take that into place. Is hold on, I don't need to be at a screen just because, to my point with punctuating your life, because I always normally would be at this time. I can go on that trampoline, or I can go for a run, or I can just see the world differently, put the screen down. And that's where I think, Shane, as you know better than most, I'm a real technophile, is that I think there is a time to put the technology down and to be present as a human. So that, again, that equilibrium, that balance between human and tech, rather than just a headlong rush or crash into the middle of it all in some kind of Android-esque manner.
And I think that's the perfect moment to let all our listeners take their earphones out and go and reconnect with the real world and stop listening to our
very
ramblings.
much. Well, there we are. And indeed, but before we should probably do that, we should very quickly say two things. Firstly, thanks ever so much for listening. I really hope you've enjoyed this series. Huge thanks to not just our guests that have taken some time to give us some comments today, but all of them along the way. 24 episodes in. Who would have thought that, Shane, when we started this journey last year in March? Your bright idea in your drawing room to go, Steve, let's record something, because we won't be able to see each other in the same way. Here we are, some 800, 900 hours, 24 episodes later. Not bad, huh, Shane?
Not bad. And just to thank you to everybody listening, because we really have appreciated the feedback and the comments and the thoughts that it's given us too. So it's helped me keep learning.
Absolutely, me too. And that would be one of my highlights, is not just the chance to spend time with a dear friend like Shane, but for people to listen in and to learn from all the guests and all the people that have commented, and indeed to try and work out how on earth you put a podcast together, which we're just about learning 24 episodes in. So, Shane, a massive thank you to you. Go well in 2021. To everybody else listening in, to all of our guests, we will see you, we hope, soon with Series 3. But we may well see you before that on LinkedIn at wwlpodcast.co.uk, where you can share your thoughts, your ideas, good or bad, for the year, the decade ahead, and whether you should hold the ball with a flat hand or not when it comes to table tennis. All sorts of pressing things. Thanks, everybody.